I remember the day he left, like it was stitched into the lining of my memory, tight and permanent, like the hem of a wedding dress you never planned to undo. It was the spring of 1968, and the lilacs were starting to bloom outside the church where we had our vows just 1 year before, the kind of bloom that smells like sweet promises, the kind that fools you into thinking nothing bad could ever come, not with skies that blue and his hand still warm in mine. His name was James, but I called him Jamie, and no one else ever did, not his mama, not the boys he grew up with, just me, and he used to say it soft, like it made him melt from the inside when I whispered it against his chest. He was quiet, thoughtful, the kind of man who would fix your squeaky door without saying a word, who carried his grief in his shoulders and his joy in the way he folded the laundry just right. He wasn't supposed to go, not at first. He'd tested for some technical job, had a plan to be a mechanic stateside, maybe teach after, but something got shuffled. They called it a reassignment. I called it a mistake, but he packed his bag anyway, kissed my forehead and told me not to cry like I was still 17, and he was still the boy who climbed the tree outside my window just to bring me the book I wanted from the store. We stood at the train station for what felt like both a second and a century, surrounded by other boys in uniform and the women who pretended they were fine. I didn't wear black that day. I wore the blue dress he liked, the one with the tiny white flowers that made him call me his spring. Even in December, he held my face in his hands like he was memorizing it, like the world might forget me, but he wouldn't, not ever, not even in the noise of helicopters and gunfire and a place so far away I couldn't even find it on a map without squinting. "I'll write you every week," he said, and he smiled, that same crooked smile he gave me the night he asked me to marry him without a ring, just a dandelion and a heartbeat that wouldn't calm down. "Don't stop waiting for me," he added, and I nodded, because I had no intention of doing anything else, not then, not ever. The train pulled away slower than it needed to, or maybe time slowed for me and not for the rest of the world. I waved until my arm ached and my fingers trembled, and then I stood there long after the train disappeared, because part of me thought if I waited long enough, he'd come back down that platform just to say one more goodbye. The letters didn't come at first, and I told myself that made sense, that mail was slow, that war didn't care about postal systems or anxious wives with empty mailboxes. I'd sit by the window every afternoon, same time, watching the red flag of the mailbox flap against the wind, my hands in my lap, tea going cold beside me, the porch creaking like an old lullaby. I didn't tell anyone I hadn't heard from him, not even my sister, because saying it out loud made it real, and I wasn't ready for that kind of truth, not yet. So I waited, and I prayed, and I dusted the same shelves over and over again just to keep from screaming into the floor. Then, one morning, I heard the soft thud of an envelope fall against the wood, and I ran so fast my slippers almost came off, and there it was, my name, in his handwriting, the same loops and careful curves he used when he wrote our grocery lists and left me notes on the bathroom mirror. I held that letter like it was his hand, trembling, alive, sacred, and I didn't open it right away. I let it sit beside me on the couch for hours, afraid that reading it would make him feel even farther away somehow, like he belonged more to the paper than to me. When I finally did open it, I read it out loud, just once, and then a second time, silently. His voice in my mind stronger than my own. He talked about the heat, the dust, the noise, how he missed the sound of my humming while I cooked, how he could still smell my shampoo if he closed his eyes hard enough. He ended it with "more soon," and I clutched that phrase like it was a promise sealed with blood. Weeks passed, then another letter came, and another, never regularly, never predictably. But they came, little windows into a place I couldn't imagine, little lifelines that tied my heart to his across an ocean and a war neither of us had chosen. Sometimes they were funny, sometimes short, sometimes long enough to make me forget where I was. I'd read them with the lamp on beside me, curled under the quilt he liked, and I'd answer them too, with every detail of our little world here, how the neighbors planted roses, how I fixed the sink, how the cat had kittens under the porch, and one of them looked like him, curious and quiet. I thought about sending pictures, but he never asked for any. Said he wanted to remember me exactly as I was the day I waved at the train. Hair, loose, eyes full of faith, and I honored that, even when it hurt, even when all I wanted was to send him a piece of now. And then, they stopped. No explanation, no warning, just silence. like a thread had been cut in the middle of the stitch. I went to the mailbox every day for 21 days straight, until my shoes wore a path into the grass, until the neighbors started watching me with the kind of worry they don't say out loud. Then the knock came, that knock, the one that makes your stomach fall to your knees before your feet even move. Two men, the same as all the stories. Uniforms pressed, faces solemn, hands behind backs like they were the ones being judged. I don't remember the words, I only remember falling, not to the ground, but into myself, like my chest caved in and my heart forgot how to beat. They said things like bravery and sacrifice and service to his country. But none of those words sounded like Jamie. None of them sounded like his laugh or the way he whispered goodnight. They handed me a box, a folded flag, and a letter from someone I didn't know, someone who called him a fine man, but never mentioned the way he held a fork or how he danced with me barefoot in the kitchen on rainy mornings. I asked them about the letters, and they looked confused, said they had no information about personal correspondence, just the official statements, just the timeline, and they left before I could ask again. I thought that was the end of everything, but I was wrong, because the letters were still coming. They just weren't arriving, not yet. The days after the funeral blurred together, like watercolor left out in the rain, colors bleeding into one another, no start, no end. Just the weight of a house too quiet for the sound of a heart still beating. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, not haunting them but being haunted by them. Every chair whispered his name, every folded shirt still smelled like him, and I couldn't bring myself to wash them, as if the scent of him was the last real thing I had left. I left his toothbrush in the holder, his boots by the back door, his wedding ring on the nightstand. I even left his favorite coffee cup by the sink, still stained on the rim from the last time he drank from it. I didn't cry loud, I didn't wail or collapse. I simply became smaller inside myself, like someone folding a flag over and over again, until it disappeared. I thought the worst had passed, the knock on the door, the folding of the flag, the empty spot beside me in bed. The silence in the kitchen where once we had danced in socks to the hum of a broken radio. But I was wrong, because grief doesn't end, it just changes rooms, and one rainy Tuesday morning, it walked through the door in the shape of a cardboard box. It arrived unannounced, no return label I recognized, no warning, just a knock, a man, in uniform, not the same one from before, younger, nervous, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. He handed me the box like it weighed more than it did, like it carried something heavier than its own size. And he said, "Ma'am, this was just cleared for release. We're sorry for the delay." And then he left before I could ask what it was. I stared at the box for hours. It sat on the table, like a wound unopened, taped shut and waiting. I didn't touch it until the sun went down, when the sky turned that soft shade of navy and everything felt suspended between light and dark. I sat with my hands on either side of it, as if holding a heartbeat, and when I finally cut it open, I stopped breathing. Inside, tied with a ribbon the color of sand, were the letters, dozens of them, some bent, some sealed, some marked with military stamps, some with nothing at all. My name on every envelope in his handwriting, his perfect, careful loops, the way he always wrote my name like it was something sacred, something soft. They were all dated, week after week, almost without fail. He had written me just like he promised, through storms, through shellfire, through hunger and sickness and nights he didn't think he'd make it to morning, and yet he wrote through the fear, through the loneliness, through everything the war tried to take from him. And all this time, I thought he hadn't. The first one I opened was dated just 3 days after he left. He said he missed my humming, the way I rubbed my thumb across the rim of my teacup, the way I tilted my head when I didn't believe him but didn't want to argue. He said the food was terrible but the stars were the same, and that made him feel less far from me. He ended it with, "I kissed your photo this morning. It still smells like lavender." I read the letters one by one, slowly, like unwrapping time itself, letting each word fall into me like rain on dry earth. He told me stories, not about the war so much, but about the boys he met, the dog they adopted at camp, how he tried to teach someone from Texas how to waltz in the mud. He told me about the dreams he had, always of me, always of our little house, always of the life we were still planning, and he always ended the letters the same way. "Yours always, Jamie." There were letters for Christmas, for our anniversary, for my birthday, even though I never received them on time, even though I had spent those days wondering why he hadn't written. crying into my pillow and telling myself maybe it was because he was busy, or tired, or worse, never knowing he had tried, again and again, to reach me, never knowing that something as simple as a stamp, a delay, a misfile, could steal the one thing I needed most, his words. I held them all to my chest, one by one, letting the pages touch my skin like he used to, reading them aloud in the kitchen, by the window, in bed, so I could hear him again, so I could feel him breathing in the room, so the house could remember the sound of love. I didn't know where to be angry, at the system, at the delay, at the war, at time itself, but mostly, I was angry at the space between us. The space that had grown bigger with every day. I waited by the mailbox thinking he'd forgotten me, when the truth was he was writing me back to life every single week. The box became a part of me. I placed it beside the bed, wrapped the ribbon around my wrist some days, when the world felt too wide, when the grocery store felt like a battlefield, when the smell of rain brought me back to the day he left. I would sit with the letters and read until the tears dried, until the ache softened, until I remembered who I was when he looked at me. And one day, I found a letter that wasn't like the rest. It was at the bottom of the box, its envelope thicker, worn at the edges, and on it, written in the corner of the flap, were 5 words that stole the air from my lungs. If I don't make it. The envelope was soft from age, like something that had waited too long to be touched. The paper fragile between my fingers, and his handwriting, even after all this time, still made my heart ache with longing. 5 words, just 5, written in the top left corner, small and quiet, almost like a secret, if I don't make it. And I held it in my lap like it might break if I breathed too hard, like if I opened it too fast, the past would spill out and drown me. I didn't read it right away. I let it sit on the table beside my tea, let the steam rise around it, like a fog that wanted to keep me from going too far too fast. I walked past it 3 times, dusted a shelf I had already dusted, changed the pillowcases even though they were clean, but it pulled at me, not with urgency, but with the kind of gravity that comes from knowing a piece of your soul is waiting for you in ink. When I finally sat down, I didn't cry, not at first. I unfolded the letters slowly, carefully, and read it with both hands gripping the edges, like I needed to feel him on the paper, like I needed my skin to remember his. The letter was dated 8 months before the day they told me he was gone, which meant he had written it early, too early, which meant he had thought about not coming home long before I was ready to consider the same. He began the way he always did, "My dearest May," and just reading my name in his voice again made my throat tighten. I could hear him saying it, soft and steady, the way he always spoke when he wanted me to believe him. Then he wrote, "If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you goodbye the way I wanted to, and for that, I'm sorry." And I paused there, because the weight of those words felt heavier than any stone. I had waited for him, I had prayed for him, and yet, somewhere in the jungle, he had already begun to say goodbye. He went on to say, he had written every week, and if the letters had made it, I would know how much he loved me, how much he missed the little things, the curl of my hair behind my ear, the way I hummed when I cooked, the way I looked at him when I didn't have to say a word but he knew anyway. He said he wasn't afraid to die, not really, not for the reasons most people thought. He said he had seen death already, in the eyes of boys who would never be men, in the dust that settled too quietly after an explosion, in the sound of nothing where laughter used to be, and what scared him wasn't dying. It was the idea of being forgotten. He asked me not to forget him, not the soldier, but the man, the boy who carved our initials in the oak tree behind the school, the man who bought me a milkshake with his last dollar, the husband who whispered forever the night before he left. Then he said something I didn't expect, something that curled around my heart and stayed there. He wrote, "If they bring me home, and something feels wrong, trust yourself, May, trust what you know. You've always known me better than anyone, better than I know myself." I read that line again and again, and I thought about the moment, at the funeral, the moment when they lowered the casket and something inside me screamed, not out loud, but quietly, deeply, something that said this isn't right. And now here he was, confirming that feeling, like he knew me too well to believe I'd just accept what they told me. He ended the letter by saying, "If there's one thing I hope you do, it's to keep living, not just breathing, not just surviving, but living, with laughter, with music, with messes and mornings and memories that don't belong only to me." And the last line, the very last line, read, "But if you need to grieve, let it be through the pages I've left behind, because I put all my love in them, and I promise I meant every word." I sat there with that letter for hours, reading it over and over. As the sun moved across the window and the shadows stretched and folded themselves into the corners of the room, I didn't cry like I expected to. Instead, I felt something else, something quiet but full, something like love and sadness holding hands. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window with a blanket around my shoulders and all the letters spread out on the floor, like pieces of a life we almost had, like voices that had waited too long to be heard. I read them out loud to the silence, to the moon, to the walls that had heard every word I'd ever spoken to him when he was gone. In one letter he wrote about a dream he had, where we were dancing in the backyard, barefoot in the grass, with the radio playing some old tune, and fireflies blinking around us like stars come down to visit. And he said he could feel my fingers in his, even in sleep. And when he awoke, he swore the dream smelled like lilacs. And I remembered that dream too, because I had dreamed the same thing once, the same song, the same fireflies, the same air thick with something more than just summer. And I wondered if, across the ocean, our dreams had met each other in the middle of the night, had danced when we couldn't. The letters became my prayer, my ritual, my rhythm. I read one every morning with my tea. Every night before bed, I folded them gently and placed them back in the box like relics, like something holy. I wasn't ready to share them with anyone, not yet. They were still just ours, just me and Jamie, just May and the man who never stopped writing. Sometimes, I'd whisper to him through the paper, ask questions I knew wouldn't be answered, tell him about the neighbor's new dog or the hole in the roof I couldn't fix. And sometimes I would close my eyes and wait, just in case he answered back in the wind, in the creak of the floorboard, in the soft sigh of the rocking chair. I didn't know what to do with the last letter, the goodbye. I didn't want to put it back in the box, but I couldn't leave it out either, so I folded it carefully and placed it under my pillow. Not for comfort, but for closeness, because even if he couldn't hold me, at least his words could rest near my head as I slept. And in my sleep, I saw him again, not in uniform, not in shadow, but in the sunlight, in the front yard, waving like he always did. And I knew he wasn't gone. Not really, not while the letters lived, not while I remembered. I used to think the letters were just for me, like they were stitched into the lining of my grief, private, sacred, something between me and the man whose heartbeat I could still feel echoing in the bones of this house. I read them over and over, until the pages softened and the ink wore thin, until I knew every curve of his handwriting, the way I once knew the freckles on his shoulders. But time has a way of whispering gently, of nudging you toward light when you've lived too long in shadow. And one afternoon, with the sun leaning through the lace curtain and the kettle whistling softly like an old friend calling you back to yourself, I realized something. His words weren't just love letters. They were lifelines, and not just for me. There was a boy in town, Eli, about 17, quiet, always staring at the ground like he was afraid the world would look back. His father died overseas too, a different war, same ache. And one day I saw him sitting alone on the steps of the library, shoulders tight like he was holding his whole heart in his back, and something in me moved. I went home, opened the box, and took out one letter, the one where Jamie talked about fear, about the silence that came after the noise, about how sometimes surviving felt heavier than dying. I folded it carefully, put it in an envelope, and walked back to the library. I didn't say much, just handed it to Eli and said, "Someone who's been through it wanted you to have this." He looked confused, but he took it, and I walked away before he could ask anything, not because I was afraid, but because I trusted the letter to do the talking. The next day, he left a note in my mailbox, handwritten, shaky, said he read it 3 times, and cried each time, said he hadn't cried in years, not even when they folded the flag over his dad's casket. He asked if I had more, so I gave him another. And then another. Soon there were others. A girl who lost her fiancé, a woman who hadn't spoken about her brother in 20 years, a man who never got to say goodbye to his son. The letters moved like roots under the ground, reaching people I hadn't met, healing things I didn't know were broken. I never charged anyone, never asked them to return them. I just asked them to read them slow, and to remember that the person who wrote them believed in love more than in fear, in connection more than in distance, and in the kind of strength that doesn't roar but simply holds on. I started copying them by hand, one by one, sitting at the kitchen table with the lamp on and the window cracked just enough to let in the night air. I'd write until my fingers ached, until the letters blurred into the page, and each time I finished one, I whispered Jamie's name, like a thank you, like a blessing. One day, a woman from the church asked if I'd speak at the Memorial Day service. I hadn't stood in front of a crowd since Jamie's funeral, and my knees didn't like the idea, but my heart said yes, not because I needed to be heard, but because his words deserved to be. I stood on the steps of the old town hall, holding one letter in my hand, reading it slowly into the wind, and when I looked up, I saw faces wet with tears, hands holding hands, and eyes that finally felt seen. After that, people started writing to me, not to ask for letters, but to send their own, their grief, their memories, their small pieces of love written in crooked handwriting and tear-stained ink, and I kept them too, not in Jamie's box, but in a new one, a bigger one, because love multiplies when you share it. The letters were never just his, they were ours, and then they became everyone's, and somehow, in giving them away, I felt closer to him than ever, as if each envelope handed 2 trembling fingers was another step toward healing. Not just mine, but the kind that stretches across years and names and wars we never wanted. I still read one every night, still keep his last one under my pillow, still listen for his voice in the creak of the porch swing and the hush of the evening wind. But now I know I'm not alone in that silence, because somewhere out there, someone is reading his words for the first time and remembering what it feels like to be held. It had been 12 years since the day that box arrived on my porch, 12 years since I held the last piece of Jamie's voice in my hands, since the words he wrote stitched my soul back together, thread by trembling thread. I had given his letters away like lanterns in the night, watching them float into other hearts, warming them where even sunlight couldn't reach. But there was one thing I hadn't done. I had never written him back, not once, not a word. I had read, wept, whispered, and carried him with me in every breath. But I had never taken a pen and said what I needed to say, because maybe I was afraid, or maybe I thought it was too late. Like writing would make it more final, like ink would build a wall between us that memory had never dared to raise. But then came the dream. It was simple, quiet, the kind of dream that doesn't feel like dreaming at all. He was sitting on the porch swing, wearing the shirt I buried him in, the blue one with the threadbare collar and the faint smell of cedar. He didn't say anything, just looked at me with those eyes that always saw too much and still chose to love. And he smiled, but there was something in the smile, a waiting. I woke up with my hand curled around nothing, my breath caught in the hollow of my chest, and I knew it was time. I pulled out one of the envelopes I had saved for years, the ones with his name written on them, just in case. And I sat at the kitchen table with the sun spilling like honey across the wood, and I began, "My dearest Jamie." The words came slower than I expected, not because I didn't know what to say, but because everything felt too small to hold the size of what I carried. I told him about the box, about Eli, about the day I read his letter in front of the town, and how people cried not because they knew him, but because they wished they had. I told him about the letters I copied, the people I met, the ones who healed beside me, and the way his words moved like roots under the skin of this world, growing things I could never have grown alone. I told him I missed his laugh, not the loud one, but the quiet one, the one that only came when I surprised him, and I told him I forgave him for not coming back, even though I never blamed him. Then I told him the thing I had never said, not to anyone, not even to myself. I told him I had fallen in love again. It wasn't like us, nothing ever could be, but it was real, and it was soft, and it didn't ask me to forget, it only asked me to live. And I did. I learned to dance again, to cook without crying, to sleep on both sides of the bed. His name was Thomas. He was kind. He knew from the beginning about Jamie, about the letters, about the porch swing that still creaked with memory. And he never tried to take Jamie's place, only to sit beside his shadow and hold my hand in the light. And now Thomas was gone to Dot, not to war, but to time. And I was alone again, not empty, but alone. And maybe that's what gave me the courage to finally write this, because I realized grief doesn't ask for permission, but love does. And Jamie had always given me both. I ended the letter simply, "Yours always, May." I folded it carefully, placed it in an envelope, and I didn't put it in the box. I didn't keep it under my pillow. I walked to the cemetery at dawn, before the birds had found their voices, and I laid it on his grave like a flower that had taken years to bloom. The wind didn't pick it up, the rain didn't fall, but something shifted, something inside me eased, like the last piece of a song finally played, and I sat on the grass and whispered, "Now you know." That night, I dreamed of them both, Jamie and Thomas, sitting at opposite ends of a long table under a tree that never lost its leaves, passing letters back and forth, smiling, waiting, and in the dream, I sat between them, and we were home.